All right, we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We are picking up in verse 39. We will back up just to put it into context. The entire chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, is about the resurrection. The resurrection that is coming for all of us, and as Paul demonstrates in the chapter, that is the message of the gospel rooted in the resurrection of Christ that gives us meaning and gives us then this hope. That because Jesus was raised from the dead, it is in this that we can look forward with confidence that we also will be raised from the dead, and that therefore it makes perfect sense for us to be willing to deal with some of the difficulties in this life, as Paul noted, and to withhold certain things because we are considering what we are doing in eternity. So we begin looking in verse 35 where Paul asks the question, two questions that he would then answer as he is finishing out his argument. He said there, but someone will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? And that is essentially then he is saying, here's what now I'm going to answer. Possible objections that people would make. Reasons why that maybe someone said, well, that can't be. That can't happen. And maybe it was an objection based upon how long it had already been. They understood the nature of the decay of the body and very well. They said that I don't get it. Can't see how that can be possible. First of all, to understand how it would be possible to even raise the dead. And then, if you've got this problem with a decaying body, what do you do if you're going to have a body? Okay? So if you are just looking at it from a school of thought that has not ever had these kind of ideas around, that would be pretty amazing and therefore hard to comprehend. So as he then began to describe this, and we have to remember as we go through all this, that he is trying to describe something to which there is no equivalent, and therefore must rely then on figure to be able to illustrate it, integrating an explanation and principle with figures and things that are familiar. So when he began to illustrate it, and he says, foolish one, that is, to just outright reject this, that makes you foolish. And one of the reasons why is that simply, why would you doubt what God's capable of doing when you consider what God has already done? In this way, I want us to, it'll come up later on, but if God can create you in the first place, He certainly can recreate you. Okay? Now, that's not exactly what's going on, but it's to understand the nature of the power involved and the knowledge that exists. God's perfectly capable of reconstituting whatever He wants and to do according to His will. So when he says that foolish one, that's at the root of it, saying these objections are not rational when you put this together within faith in what God has done. What you sow is not made alive unless it dies. So now he entered into this whole idea of an illustration of the sowing and ultimately the idea of a farming idea of you start with a seed. It is small, it's significant, it's just this little piece of something else. It doesn't look at all like what ultimately is going to grow, but you put that in the ground, and from that small little thing, something that does not actually resemble it in the least comes out of the ground. And that's kind of what he is trying to point out at this. And he said then, as we were closing last week in verse 38, but God gives it a body as He pleases, and to each seed its own body. And that was a reference to this illustration, that God is capable then of having a seed which has a body in its own sense, and understand what that means. I asked you, what is a body? It is some form of a container by which that expresses whatever, with various limitations, its identity. So here you have a seed And it has, you say, well, it has all the potential there to be a plant. Yes, but it's just a seed right now. It has to be planted if you want it to be a plant. And that's the point that he is making here, is that the order and the nature and the comparison is, what we have now is something small and insignificant compared to what will come after we are planted, that is, after we are dead and buried. Okay? That there is a big difference. And now he needs to illustrate this, and that's where we'll pick up in verse 39, where he writes, all flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of animals, another of fish, and another of birds. Now, the most important question here is, why would he bring up flesh of animals in comparison to flesh of men here in this context of all things? What is his point that he is making? And you may have to look ahead to fully appreciate this point. He's creating a contrast, isn't he? There is one kind, okay? So you've got one flesh of men, another flesh of animals, another of fish, another birds. Now remember, he is answering the questions from verse 35. So we have to be careful that we don't take something beyond its context because through speculation and imagination. He's answering that question. The other problem we can get into, we have to remember in interpretation, is the nature of what is being illustrated, so that we don't, again, take something that is for illustration's purposes and turn it around and make that the point. Okay? So what is the first thing that just, he's making things that should be obvious, he's bringing up, right? Y'all were not surprised or shocked in any way for Paul to say that the flesh of men is different than the flesh of animals and birds and stuff. That didn't shock you, did it? I just want to make sure and put it out there. All right. Okay, what is the point? What is he saying then? He says, there's one. What did he just say? That beforehand he was referring to the resurrection and saying it was going to be different from what you have now. It's going to be different afterwards. On what basis that, well, wait a minute, that can't be right. Here is, God made a lot of different types of flesh already. This isn't any big deal. Why would that be a big deal that there be a different kind of body? If there are already a lot of different kinds of bodies. Now this is a different again, but this is why, again, you don't take the illustration too far. Otherwise, you're going to have people ending up thinking that they're going to come back in the shape of a horse. Okay, that's not what this is saying either. The point is that because the variety, the difference, the fact that there are differences is what shows, and he's using the physical world to illustrate this point. He has not left, verse 35, his whole point is about the resurrection of your body, our bodies. That's what he's talking about. So when he points this out is that you should not assume that it's going to be the same. Based upon, number one, the illustration of the seed planting, so time, and also the fact that God has made a variety of types of flesh already. So that shouldn't come as any surprise that that's possible. Now he builds on this in verse 40. Okay? And hopefully this will help make it make sense. Though you always have to deal with other ideas that have been put out there. There are also celestial bodies and terrestrial bodies. But the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of where some people have taken this, but we end up in some having like ranks of bodies. You got You've got a terrestrial body. Some get a terrestrial body, some get a celestial body. I'm holding out for the celestial myself. Okay. That's not what this is saying. First, you need to know what the terms are. All it means when it says celestial as a body, that just means that heavenly. Other places it's just translated heavenly or based upon the heavens. Okay, and this is actually key to what he is. It'll come back up when you see an argument later on. The other is based upon the earth. So you have one that is tied to the earth and one that's tied to the heaven. The only difference here is he has moved the argument simply to the place of its foundation. That's it. But when he says heavenly, we always think, oh, that's got to be, he must be talking about angels or that. No. Keep reading when he says, but the glory of the celestial is one and the glory of the terrestrial is another. He's already been talking about, in verse 39, terrestrial bodies. Bodies that are upon the earth. Now, what is the other idea when you think about heavenly, the heavens? Okay? Greg?
In the ancient imagination, didn't they believe that stars, what we would call other planets and stars, were supernatural beings?
They did. I don't know that is specifically relevant. That is, the tie there was more, they thought it was maybe somebody, you got your, if you were really good or something, that you when you died, you got a star, you became a star or something like that. So it's its own version of reincarnation in ways. But in general, he's just talking about the difference, because he's comparing it between things that are upon the earth and things that are upon the heavens. I was actually thinking of a different idea, which is the concept of that we don't talk about the same way they did when they refer to the heavens. It was he could. That's the difference. But that's not what this is talking about. The whole idea is that while we still trying to discover them, is that God knows every single one of them. So, but here the emphasis is actually on the difference of the bodies. He's contrasting now bodies upon the earth and bodies not in, we always think immediately heaven, but the heavens. Okay? In their way of thinking, particularly Jewish way of thinking, but you have, this word means skies. Okay? Sorry, I'm getting a note. Okay. I just learned what a sky is. A way to illustrate this, one of the planets, I'm going to say is the equivalent of the Greek word Uranos. Okay? And it's named after the sky god. Okay, that's why. Because they had in mind the idea of the sky, which is what we think of, what's above us. The whole idea was what's above us and beyond us. So it had to do what's in the immediate sky above you. What we think about as atmosphere was first sky. Beyond that, we'd think of what the visible universe, okay, beyond. That would still be heavens. It's like in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's talking about the physical, the expanse, okay, the space. Okay? And then the idea of a third heaven that you see referred to in 2 Corinthians, it was considered where God was, that is beyond the physical universe. Okay? So when he talks about bodies, that he's already referred to those that were terrestrial when he's talking about these different kind of things that are upon the earth. Now, having stated this and say, but this is even different again, so remember we're cataloging differences. Notice what he says about verse 41. These are related, okay, contextually. So he's just said and the glory of the terrestrial is another. The next thing he says is, there is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for one star differs from another star in glory. Now notice what all he's trying to get across with all of these is, now we're going to deal with the things that are beyond the earth, in the heavens. Same thing is true for them too. And when he puts up and you look at, okay, we've got a sun, what is different? I mean, we can make a scientific kind of calculation. That's not what he's not trying to teach science, y'all. What is he looking at from the point of view of what's going on? It is in the heavens, you see sun, moon, and stars. Right? It goes back to Genesis 1. Okay, what's above you? But they're different. Right? I say these things that are obvious, and you'll look at me like, is he right? Okay, anybody stay up and go out and look at the eclipse? On TV, okay. The whole idea is that, you know, we know there's a difference of what happens when the moon, okay, say a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse. Okay? We're getting in the way. That's when you get the solar eclipse. I'm sorry, the lunar eclipse. The moon gets in the way. That's for us in between. You cuts out the light. The sun produces. It's a star. Okay? The moon is just reflecting, but that's actually a reflect of the differences for our benefit of each one. The idea of the glory, that is the expression. Again, the expression of its own greatness that's rooted in how it was made, its proximity, when you include the moon. They're all different. The sun is different than the moon. That's why you have day and night. Okay? When you look up at the stars, you can notice the differences based upon both the size of the star, what's going on within its core, and how far away it is. All those things affect how it appears in the sky, correct? Okay, so all of them are different. So he's cataloged now these differences, first of all in terms of the order, but now just about the basic makeup of something. And what he has done, you say, well, he has tied it in first to we are different, so God can make different bodies like this if he wants to, because he already has. Now he's going to make a contrast. He's going to tie in, okay, but there are also other kinds of bodies other than what are terrestrial bodies. There are celestial bodies in the heavens. He's going to call them. They're different from one another too. And that's what this verse is all about. Now, all of that is illustration. To get you to verse 42. So also. You get that? All of this, the question that was asked in verse 35, illustrations in between to illustrate what God can do. And then he says, ours is like that. So also is the resurrection of the dead. Okay? So now, back to our subject from these illustrations, I'm going to build upon that idea. That is, that there's going to be a difference. Major differences. Okay? And that's what he follows with in a series of statements about the nature of the resurrected body. He says, the body is sown in corruption. Notice that he picked up, using sown, he picked up on his first illustration. Okay, that showed how all this ties together. Okay, he picked up on the first one, so that shows you he's referring to the whole, that all that was together to show one point of the differences. Now he's going to lay out some of those differences in principle. It's sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. Okay, what does it mean, corruption, incorruption? Okay, diseased would be one example of that. Is that something is corrupt? There's something wrong with it. Something goes wrong with it, and this nature of the body, it's So it's sown, that's the current body. So it's planted down. This is a body that is known by, kind of inherited, its corruption. Now, that is both, when you think about it, that is both its corruptible nature spiritually. How far each one of these goes, it's hard to say within this context. But it is physically corruptible. I think here probably the spiritual is more in the emphasis, but not entirely, because of its nature. Okay, it can decay. That's right. It's not going to last forever. It's going down. It's second law of thermodynamics and entropy kicking in all the time, right? So that's the nature of it. It's raised in incorruption, a negation of all those problems. Okay? So there's something's going to change. Then if this is the spiritual, then it's changed in such a way so that it's unaffected then by what we deal with now. If it's spiritual, then that is to say that the nature of the body is going to be so different, so that it is be so different so that free moral agency would no longer exist. If that's spiritual. The reason why I want to bring up that, he's going to bring up mortality in a moment, which is specific to the physical, which is what makes me think that this is likely more of a spiritual component, but not entirely. Now verse 43. It is sown in dishonor. Now notice he's still in the same theme. It's very different. That's what this whole is about. It is very different. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. Now he's already brought up glory, so now he's picking up the discussion he just left about the differences in the glory of the sun, moon, stars, and that they differ in glory. So now he's picking up that part of his illustration to use, and he is pairing it with dishonor. So the current situation is we have something that is dishonorable, but it's being contrasted with glory. The best I can do to help you on this is to go back in terms of how both those words, because I find this to be a difficult one. Everyone agree? That both to some degree have to do with reputation. That is, the idea of dishonor is that you lack honor, is that you've been your reputation has been ruined or shattered, or you are, shame brought. Well, that is kind of what the human condition is. Glory is a word. The word is doxa, and it's a broad. It covers a lot. Okay, but a related word is where we get dogma from. Okay? And that has the idea of things that are established. Well, doxa is the whole idea of, rooted in the word dokeo, which is about having an opinion. So doxa is an established opinion about something's greatness. That's why it's used, say, aren't those great? Wow. And then when you talk about the glory of God, it is kind of an all-encompassing thing about the reputation God deserves for who he is in what he has done. Well, for the body, then, the dishonor is in the fact that, yes, we've sinned, we've not done exactly right entirely. And so there's some problems that go with the nature of this. And this body is going to be, though, associated with glory, a great reputation. Matter of fact, you will find the word glory or glorified often used both of Jesus' resurrection and in reference to ours as a coming thing. So the raising up of a renewed status, that we get to start over with our reputation never to be tarnished again. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. He's still using sown, so to keep you going back, this is the body. Sown in weakness. Is this physical weakness? Is it spiritual weakness? Physical? If so, then that's kind of talking about this is the one that it's wearing out all the time. And it kind of goes back to whether or not you're talking with the weakness and the power. Is it kind of talking about where it gets kind of its basic character from? Is it tied in with the idea of weakness and that you're just kind of, we're all limited. We're very limited. And then the next word he says in power is the active ability, dunamis, the power to be involved and capable. Really, that's a pretty good word for this. Fully capable. So if weakness is the idea of limited, then dunamis is the idea of fully capable. And that is the nature of the body. There are some things that we cannot do. The new body will not have those same limitations. I'll give you a simple illustration of this. When Moses was meeting with the Lord at Sinai, this is not in Exodus 3, but in Exodus 33 and 34. He says, "Show me your glory." He says, "No one can see me and live." That was Jesus. In 1 John 3, verse 1 and following, we shall see him as he is. This body partially keeps us from being able to experience God fully because of how limited it is. And that's one of the things that is going to be changed. Verse 44. It is sown. Oh, go ahead, John. Oh, hey, look, we've had this discussion in the school of where is Enoch? That's right. Well, you need to take whatever you know about Enoch, consider this, and then draw conclusions. Also, he wasn't sinless. So both Enoch and Elijah, taken from the earth, it does not actually say what he would do beyond that. Okay? The difference is God determined it so that it wasn't just simply the corruption that we're talking about here that created that situation. It was God stepping in to not have that happen that made it special. Wait a minute, you're going to talk about that and Revelation in the same question? What happened to my friend? Mm-hmm. That is, they did forget that what that's capable of. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Brock, if he gets out of hand again, you take care of me. Verse 44, it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Now, the word for natural, and that's a good translation. it would throw you off if I've told you. It means pertaining to the soul. But that soul itself is not the same as spirit, which is what he's distinguishing here. Because that has to do with an attachment to what makes you alive with a body. So it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Now, what we tend to think of when we think of body, we immediately assume body. Right? This is what a body is. He's been spending all this time illustrating to say, not quite that simple. Because there are different types of bodies. That's what he's been getting at. Now, he's comparing then what we have, which is a natural body, this one, in which it gains its ability to express through combination of the physical part we got and has that animating force in it with spirit. But it's raised a spiritual body. So there's a major difference between these two. Now, he does not go into detail, other than what we've already done, on what all those differences are. I'll explain a little bit more, but Greg?
I was going to say that word, other than this chapter, Paul used it back in chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
Say how the natural man does perceive the things of God's Spirit.
Yeah.
And then James 3 uses it in wisdom. This wisdom is not from above, but from the
Yes.
earthly,
Sensual. And the both cases in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and in James 3, it is something that is associated with this earth, you notice, which ties it back in to the earthly, which is the terrestrial. Okay, this body. So the whole idea is those things this is tied, it is raised a spiritual body. Now, he then closes this verse by saying, there is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. Now, think about what he's gone through so far, what he has been saying. He had to show that God did have and was fully capable of having multiple types of bodies to varying degrees and in different fashion and order. Okay, plant, or as he started, and that he kept that up. Well, so now he's kind of concluding and saying, so based upon the original thing with what body, that was the original question in verse 35, okay? So if you go back and say, okay, did he answer this? Yes. How are the dead raised up and with what body do they come? He's saying it's a spiritual body. Now, this, of course, is going to lead, and he's still got some more information to give us, but there's going to be resurrection physical, okay? But in terms of the body then that he is going to provide, it's going to be different. And that's actually the key of what he is pointing out. How can you have this associated with this body? Let me explain some of the problems when we limit our thinking on this. When I was young, I had a sweet great-grandmother, good Christian lady, just wonderful woman. Okay, when I knew her, I'm trying to remember exactly the time and everything, but I remember going to see her usually when I was around like elementary age, maybe into junior high. She passed away, she was around 90. She knew me as a little boy. Okay? Now, Now, we go on, and it says, my children never knew her. Okay? They didn't naturally know me as a little boy. So how are they? Death comes. Now you have the problem of how are both going to be able to know you? What are you going to look like? The problem is not in being known. It's in assuming the way you will know one another is the same physical process that you do now because of the limitations of this body. That's part of the point. This body, as a container of the Spirit and the means of expression of the Spirit, it's a limited means of expression. It can only do so much. He's talking about the fact that all of those things to match up of what's capable, especially in terms of seeing God, being in His presence, okay, 2 Thessalonians 1, 7 through 9, is going to be possible because of the difference in the body. Okay? God has to change that. He's going to come to that in the time frame ahead, but He has to establish that the basic. He doesn't tell you essentially the nature of the body here. He just says it's going to be significantly different. Do not assume it's just you, but you kind of have a glow about you. Okay? Don't do that. Okay? Because that doesn't match up with what he is saying is more. So he's going to, in verse 45 then, he says, and so it is written. Okay, so now he's walked you through from verse 35 up to this point. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. All right? Where do we find this? Y'all are quiet today. I don't know it. Genesis 2:7. This is in the process. You've had the creation week, but now we get it from the perspective of, with an emphasis on the covenant with man. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And this is the word that is, and that's a good translation, but literally it is unto the point of being a living soul. And I think that's important in the context here because it's immediately tying the creation of Adam, in which he basically had life given to him. So you've got the dust and then the life, which is soul, which is related to the word that is the natural body. Those are tied together. So then, notice, the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Spirit, which is tied to the new body, the spiritual. Okay? So in doing this, he goes back to creation, all right, where man is made, the first man, Adam, okay, says became a living being. So he puts that out there and said, okay, now we're going to create another contrast, but I'm going to go all the way back. Be quiet, because all of us we have our existence and our type of existence go all the way back to Adam. Well, that's still the kind of being we are. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Now, what's he talking about there? Has to be Christ. Okay, now, why? Well, context. You go back to the first half of this chapter, and this is what has to be, is that Jesus is making this possible. He's a life-giving or life-making, life-producing spirit, so that we took on the character, the form, Okay, now that's a loaded word in Greek, but the whole idea of what we are in our makeup, we took on the character and the makeup of Adam the first time. But in the second time, it'll be Christ and what he is like at that moment that informs what we will be and what kind of body we will have. Now, remember, all of that still goes back to what we covered in chapter 15, 24 through 28, on that Jesus himself will, after having put an end to all the enemies, he's going to be coming back to that. So there's a parallelism in this chapter that we'll see as we get closer to the end of the chapter. That he has taken care of his enemies, then he will be subject to the one to whom all things are subject, that God may be all in all. So we're not going to be gods. But Jesus, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, is still a man, but yet God. And it's on the basis of that combination of expression that he gained post-resurrection, and then when he was taken up into heaven, that will be the basis upon which we receive something and change into something very, very different. We will try to build on that next week. Appreciate your attention very much.